I'm delighted to welcome back Jordan Berke, the founder and CEO of Tomorrow, a leading retail digital consultancy that consults to many of the large retailers around the world. Jordan is a veteran of the industry, having spent 20 years working in and around digital omnichannel, spent a long time in China working with Walmart and really creating innovative relationships with Tencent and JD and really changing the face of omnichannel in China. Jordan's also been recognised by Walmart in a range of ways, the Sam Walton Award, but also represented the Omnichannel Forum for the organisation. It's great to have you back in Australia, Jordan. Look forward to the discussion.
Gary, this is the best time of the year.
Well, let's get into it. You were in Australia this time last year, and we spoke about the drivers influencing e-commerce. When you look at global retail in 2026, what feels fundamentally different compared to what we spoke about last year?
Gary, we're in the most dynamic moment that retail and e-commerce has faced in the last 20 years. Of course, there's the AIification of our industry. There's the role that content is increasingly playing in connecting with consumers and informing LLMs. There's speed. We've never been a faster industry. But I think if you look at the last 12 months, the marketplace segment has had the biggest leap forward. Why? In the last 12 months, Gary, the trust that consumers have in marketplaces has changed more than we've seen historically, and now customers are trusting third-party items on marketplaces as much as they do first-party items, which makes the marketplace today the most attractive, dominant format, not just in e-commerce, but in retail.
Now, I know you're talking probably at this stage globally, but I'm really keen to hear your thoughts on Australia as a market. It's often described as both advanced but isolated, and there are some unique structural things about Australian retail and e-commerce compared to the US, and Europe and Asia, in fact. So just your perspective on that.
Gary, I think, to be honest, we would say that Australia's e-commerce market is moving from isolated to advanced. Historically, it's been a market that hasn't been as dynamic. You haven't had as much global competition, and local competitors haven't been as aggressive in creating amazing world-class e-commerce experiences. That era is done. We are fully immersed in a highly competitive, highly dynamic moment for Australian e-commerce. You can obviously see Amazon, Temu, and Shein are invested and are creating standards for customer experiences that are higher than any local players have seen historically. Your local retail leaders are responding and leaning in and investing. They know they've got to close the gap with those global peers. And so we're in the most competitive moment that we've seen in probably 20 years, we think, in Australian retail. And it's an amazing time for consumers. It's a critical time for retailers. It's an essential time for AusPost to lean in and to help retailers be more competitive. So it's a unique moment.
Now, you're saying this is being driven by marketplaces, but looking across the markets you know well, how do you see the marketplace landscape here in Australia sort of evolving over the next 2 to 3 years? I mean, clearly you're saying it has to change.
It does. We need to remember marketplaces in Australia are still far smaller as a share of e-commerce than they are globally. You're seeing a marketplace penetration of about 25% of Australian e-commerce. The global average, Gary, is 65%. So there is an enormous room for growth in marketplaces in Australia, and we see all the marketplaces leaning in to drive that growth. One of the biggest disruptive factors that you're seeing is speed from Amazon. Amazon is committed to rolling out its same day or faster playbook that's worked so well in the US and Canada and UK. That is just going to make shopping on a marketplace like Amazon so much more convenient, and it's going to elevate standards across consumer segments across the country. Marketplaces, whether they be international or local, are going to have to keep up, or they're going to start to lose relevance.
And I'm assuming when you say keep up, not necessarily taking Amazon head on, having their own value proposition?
It's a great question. I think if you're a broadline retailer and you want to retain relevance, taking on Amazon is essential. You can't avoid it because that's the position they want to own, the everything store with the most convenient proposition. But what's exciting about omnichannel retailers is the chance to differentiate, the ability to leverage your physical presence and connection with customers and communities to enable a better marketplace or better omnichannel experience is totally there. Differentiating on the products that you own and buy, sell. Your first-party assortment is an exciting way that local retailers are differentiating. But there are table stakes. You've got to be able to compete on selection, on price value, on speed, on user experience and increasingly on the incorporation of AI in making that experience more conversational, more personalized. So this is a critical moment where retailers, yes, have to differentiate, but they've got to embrace certain table stakes that are non-negotiable.
And just on that, what does good, so for an omnichannel retailer, there are some, I assume there are some must-haves to make that, to leverage the centralized DC, distribution center, and the local store. What has to be true, for that to really play out and to be world-class or best-in-class in that?
Great question, Gary. Beyond marketplace, any omnichannel retailer that wants to win as omnichannel needs to understand how to leverage the store as well as the fulfillment center. Great e-commerce typically combines both. The fulfillment center is a wonderful solution for long tail assortment that you're not going to carry in store, assortment where turnover is lower and it's an extended assortment. It's also great where you can take that extra day in some cases to be able to deliver. You don't need an immediate on-demand experience, but the store is essential if you want to win in that on-demand era. We're going to talk a bit about how on-demand is taking hold in Australia. Globally, it's been one of the fastest growing segments. Customers love immediacy, and immediacy, true immediacy, 1 to 2 hour experiences are only enabled through leveraging the store. And so learning how to use the store for fulfillment, how to use it for click and collect, how to place a locker in that location and be able to use that for an out-of-home pickup point. So stores play a critical role, and retailers who are truly omni figure out how to leverage the store well and the fulfillment center to do both in a competitive way.
Great, okay. Now, let's talk to brands, because a lot of brands are still trying to work out the right balance between direct-to-consumer, marketplaces, or a hybrid of both. So from what you're seeing globally, where is the real competitive advantage starting to emerge? And are there any brands you can think of are getting that balance right?
Yeah. I think what's exciting for brands today is the number of channels that you have to be able to reach consumers and be able to drive your business. So the first thing that we always say is a brand needs to understand where their customer prefers to shop and ensure they've got a path to winning in that channel. And for most brands, Gary, that's multiple channels. So they likely have customers that want to find them on a marketplace, and so they've got to figure out how do they stand out and over-index in that marketplace. If they're big enough and trusted enough, they'll have their own app, their own channel, D2C, where they can serve customers and be great in that channel and giving the deepest experience with that brand. But increasingly, they've got to be great with social content. They've got to find in those content channels how they can really cut through and create compelling, interesting, engaging content so that customers, not only when they're shopping, but when they're leisuring, when they're learning, when they're seeking inspiration, those brands are showing up in that feed effectively. And so it's about getting your channel strategy right. It's understanding how I win in each channel, the role that each channel plays in my overall strategy, but then really understanding how content is the overlay to them all. We're going to talk a bit more about that because it's one area we think 2026 will really be emphasizing.
And I'm assuming that content is as important in the context you just described, but also for social commerce and I guess for AI, as AI emerges, right?
It is. It is. It is probably the fuel or the oil, if you will, of great commerce going forward. Content is how you really distinguish yourself, both with humans who are looking for, as I said, inspiration. Think about how much more time you, your kids, your friends have spent on content platforms in the last 2 years relative to the last 10. It's the fastest growing part of our life, good or bad, and that is where humans are being influenced and engaged. Meanwhile, LLMs are there as well. They're also leveraging that content to be able to learn and gain context. And so the better you are in content channels, the more likely you are to be understood and surfaced in an AI channel. And so the real flywheel going forward is being able to have what we call a content factory. As a retailer, as a brand, having an always-on content muscle that ensures you're continuously producing compelling content so that both humans are engaging with you, but LLMs are also learning about you every day.
And who would you say would be doing that really well around the globe right now?
Well, Most tier one retailers are attacking both of these opportunities. I think Sephora still stands out as really being a pioneer and embracing content as a competitive advantage. And so when you look at Sephora in most of its markets, first, it over-indexes within the content platforms. It's wonderful on TikTok. It's great on Snap, on YouTube Shorts. But at the same time, it uses that content within its own app to be able to enrich its shopping experience. And what that's done in turn is as LLMs are scraping the Sephora app, they're walking away smarter and they're more likely to recommend Sephora when a prompt or when a customer's conversing on GPT or Gemini. And so I think Sephora has really been a pioneer and set the pace. But whether it be Walmart, Target in the US, many of your retailers here, content is becoming the competitive advantage when it comes to influencing consumers, whether it be on commerce platforms or just in their everyday life.
Right, okay. Now, changing course, you mentioned earlier lockers, and you were in the context of omnichannel, but lockers can be critical for pure play as well on a number of levels. But we're seeing rapid adoption globally, and it is different by market. But in the more mature locker markets outside Australia, what's really driving that uptake? Is it consumer behaviour, urban density? Is it retailer strategy, or is it something else?
Yeah, it's such an exciting topic because there are markets where lockers are so native to the e-commerce experience, and then those where it's not. And the ingredients we see in those markets like Germany, like Poland, like China, where it's really become native, is A, you've got a major player that's willing to invest in building out a locker network. B, the biggest e-commerce players adopt out of home as one of their delivery propositions, and they incentivize customers towards that option by giving a lower free delivery threshold, usually, Gary, or some type of other incentive. Those two things over a prolonged period, usually a couple years, end up shaping consumer adoption for that out-of-home experience in such a positive way that then consumers demand it. They expect it to become an option, and so the rest of the industry ends up picking up. You're at that critical moment where it's unclear whether Australia is going to be a locker market or not. I think it's a great advantage to both e-commerce providers and consumers, and so I'm really optimistic and hopeful that with your investments and the industry's embrace, this becomes a convenient locker market.
Great, okay. Well, there's a challenge. Now, you and I were speaking to a customer last night about in-store fulfillment versus from a central location, and I think fulfillments can be treated as a bit of a back-end operational issue. And we know that retailers who want to compete with Amazon need to have world-class fulfillment. So how should a retailer be thinking about fulfillment infrastructure as part of their brand and customer experience rather than just a logistics thing?
The best retailers view fulfillment as an advantage. They view elite fulfillment as the goal, and they know if they can be better than their peers at fulfillment, they will win. And so what we've seen from Walmart to others around the world is a focus on fulfillment and treating it as important as the customer front-end experience. Whether it be technology investment, talent investment, capital investment, fulfillment has to be a priority. And particularly for omnichannel retailers, you've got to, as we talked about, Gary, develop two fulfillment muscles. You've got to be great at fulfillment center fulfillment, which is a pretty straightforward operation, but you've also got to be great at in-store fulfillment. You've got to teach, encourage, and inspire, incentivize your stores to embrace in-store fulfillment and make that an advantage, and that is challenging. But the best omnichannel retailers view it as an opportunity and make sure that they're as invested in that as they are their front-end proposition, and elite fulfillment ends up winning every time.
Now, one of the predictions from last year was around social commerce, which I think has played out. And whilst TikTok Shop hasn't arrived yet in Australia, there's no question that social commerce is growing, and I think back to content, as you said. But you know, there's also AI, and it's one thing you spoke a little bit about last year, but has just accelerated it's on a weekly basis almost. So I'd just love your perspective on the role AI plays for a retailer, and maybe back of house and front of house, and what's important to think about in the coming 12 months.
Yeah, what's become very clear is AI is going to transform two dimensions of being a retailer going forward. It's going to transform how you operate. You're going to buy differently, you're going to supply differently, you're going to market differently, and that whole opportunity we call co-intelligence. You're going to need to become co-intelligent as a retailer to keep up and lead. Meanwhile, co-consumption is what we call the change in consumer behavior, where AI is playing an increasing role in how consumers research, how they consider, how they convert. And so as a retailer, you've got to stay close to how your customer is embracing co-consumption and what that looks like. What's so exciting is that 70% of the impact of AI in retail so far has been on the co-intelligence side. It's adapting AI, inserting it into your process, and making your teams more effective. Look no further than Walmart in the US and the incredible impact they have had on their buying organizations and end-to-end teams, making them more effective by embracing AI. What we're seeing now in this moment is co-consumption starting to take center stage, because now we see in Australia, for instance, over 50% of consumers not just using AI to research while they're shopping. And so increasingly, Australian retailers, as well as retailers around the world, they're starting to learn, what is that experience going to look like as we go forward? The best approach we find to answering that question is creating optionality, is ensuring that whatever that looks like, whether that's consumers checking out on a ChatGPT or researching on GPT and using an app of yours inside GPT to check out, or being on your own platform and wanting an agentic experience there, making sure you've got your bases covered. You're learning what each of those experiences requires, and you're figuring out how do you win, because one of those ways forward is likely to be the dominant one, and you better not be left behind when that becomes commonplace.
So it sounds like optionality is what you're saying, to keep options open, to test and learn, and to continue to, it's moving at a rate of knots, so we don't have all the answers.
It is. On the consumer side, optionality is going to be worth more than everything. However, optionality requires work. It requires studying, learning, investing in figuring out each of these new ways consumers are behaving and making sure you're at the forefront, so that when it becomes mainstream and the default for customers going forward, you're not racing to catch up.
Right. Okay, now we've covered a lot of ground, so I have one final question, maybe a catch-all I could call it, but if you're advising an Australian retailer looking to build a genuine international edge in 2026, what are the one or perhaps two capabilities you'd prioritise first?
So first, I would recommend that they embrace what I call a best-in-world mindset. We started this conversation with the evolution from isolated to advanced, and realizing that you're no longer in a market where okay is good enough. The standard that Aussie consumers are expecting of you is now world-class. And so you as a retailer need to embrace that you've got to deliver a world-class experience. So first, I would embrace across the organization that we've got to step up and be able to be elite like many of our international peers in order to keep up, if not lead. Second, I would make sure that you are great at what we call the omnichannel muscles necessary to win as an omnichannel retailer. And that is a bit of a catch-all, but it really is how you show up in a uniquely omnichannel way in your digital channels, how you leverage your stores effectively to create advantage, how you get the organization behind the future of digital growth, including content-driven commerce, as well as the AIification of that consumer experience. You've got to have momentum across the organization, all teams, every individual committed to winning as an omnichannel retailer, and that takes a lot of effort, a lot of hustle, but it's an incredibly rewarding experience, and there's nothing like it when you can take on an international competitor and outperform them. That's where you know you're really achieving your potential.
Well, that sounds like a pretty fair challenge. I know from an Australia Post perspective, we're really doubling down on AI, and we are testing and learning. So we're using different LLMs, and we're encouraging our teams to test and learn. So really realising we just have to be part of it. We can't wait. Well, look, thank you so much. We've covered a lot of ground. It is a really exciting industry to be in and changing so rapidly. So again, we appreciate you coming out to Australia, sharing your global perspective, and lots to take away from the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary.